Audio Jungle.
What happened? Federal government shut down for 3 days, throwing Washington into turmoil. And for what exactly? There's no deal on DACA, which was supposed to be the Democrats' line in the sand, right? It's just Mitch McConnell's, quote, intention to bring it up. And the spending bill passed by Congress today and signed by the president tonight, it just kicks the can right down the road, funding the government for less than 3 weeks. Why did we go through all of this? You know what? So who are the winners and who are the losers in all of this? Well, we know the DACA folks lost, Democrats lost, really the American people. Has anything really changed? And what about the deal maker in chief? Where has he been? And what happens on February 8th? Will we be right back where we started? Stay tuned. So let's get right to CNN's chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, senior White House correspondent, Pamela Brown, political analyst, April Ryan. Thank you all so much for joining us. I think those are very legitimate questions. We went through all of this rigmarole, Pamela, for days. I was up until 2 a.m. on this network on Friday night or Saturday morning. Capitol Hill finally got their act together. But the big question throughout all of this has been, and I asked this on Friday night as well, and where's the president? And on Saturday, where is the president?
Right. That was what a lot of people were asking. You know, the self-proclaimed deal maker, he very much stayed behind the scenes. He, we're told by White House officials, was making calls, that he was busy, that he was making sure the shutdown went smoothly. Some White House officials have said that, you know, this didn't need to be about him, that there was really no reason for him to be more engaged than he was on Friday when he met with the minority leader, Chuck Schumer. Other sources tell us that there was concern that if the president interjected himself, again, that it would cause some confusion, could hamper any negotiations that were happening on the Hill. And even tonight, Don, he signed the continuing resolution quietly in the residence. It's clear that he wants to keep a low profile. This is by design. The question is, will he play a more active role as we look ahead, as Republicans and Democrats trying to hash out an immigration bill? Will he be more active in trying to get it through the House if it does pass in the Senate? So a lot of questions there, Don.
Dana Bash, I want to bring you in. So what exactly did Democrats actually get? Because progressives think that their base is pissed. They think that they caved.
Yeah, that's an understatement. The Democratic base, which has been so enraged, so energized, and that's one of the reasons, aside from the underlying policy, which Democrats and a lot of Republicans believe in, keeping the Dreamers in the United States legally. Just the political side of that, one of the main reasons that the Democrats felt really compelled to fight hard and take it past the brink and allow the government to shut down was because they had the fervor of the base behind them. And this is no question. This is something that has hurt the Democratic leadership in the short term, at least, with the Democratic base. And the reason I use the phrase short term, Don, is because the hope among Senate Democratic leaders, Chuck Schumer in particular, I'm told, is to take the short term hit with the base and, you know, in the broader sort of political zeitgeist, in the hopes that at the end of the day, that they can get a bill and a promise on a bill that will allow these Dreamers to stay and get it through the Senate. Now, that's a big gamble, particularly since they went past the brink with this shutdown. And in the short term, it certainly is a political hit that Schumer has had to take. But my understanding is that he had a lot of pressure from the Democrats who ended up voting yes. I mean, it was about 18, 19 Democrats or so who voted no. Many of them are from sort of the progressive wing or have, frankly, aspirations for running for president in 2020. The majority of the Democratic caucus wanted this to end and wanted to find a solution.
So here's what Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz says, Dana, that Senate Democrats and Schumer got, quote, the potential for momentum. I mean, Is that a thing? Because didn't they have a promise before all of this? No. Didn't they say that we can talk about this later? Wasn't that exactly what happened before they got to this deal? It's just, the language is no different.
No, it's not. And look, I think it's pretty obvious that the fact that Senator Schumer and his fellow Democratic leaders in the Senate decided to cut this shutdown short says a lot about the idea of getting what they wanted by using this shutdown as leverage, by using the bill to fund the government as leverage. It seemed pretty clear after just a few days that it wasn't going to work, and they did get a concession that they hadn't gotten before from the Republican leader, from the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, which is to put something on the floor with what he called a level playing field, which means, you know, allowing the Democrats and Republicans to contribute, and those who are for and against whatever the base of this bill that allows the Dreamers to stay, to contribute. And if he doesn't do it by that date, they'll be able to force it. Yeah. It's not a huge concession, but it is more than he had before. Well,
here's April, I'm going to bring you in. Here's the frustration, and I think I'm speaking for the American people, and it's not just frustrating, April, because, you know, Democrats didn't get, it's like, why go through this entire process if
to go
it is
through it again.
To go through it again and to get the exact same thing. That's what Republicans promised you. That's what Mitch McConnell promised you before you shut the government down. And so if you weren't going to hold out for something that you thought was better, if there was no real principle behind this, then why take the American people through it? I think that is the frustration. And why get your base all riled up thinking, oh my gosh, Democrats are finally standing up and they're strong, they're not going to cave, they're not going to wet the bed at the end of the day like they usually do, and then they end up doing it anyways.
You know, I listened to Cedric Richmond, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, with Wolf earlier today, talking about the message. They just did not get their message out. But it's more than message. There's an exasperation, Donna. We talked about this over and over again. And my concern, not concern, but really what I'm looking at more so as a reporter, how this is going to play out in the next 17 days. Because now, what will the Democrats do to prevent this same kind of situation where everybody's wringing their hands trying to figure out what's going on? Because the action needs to start now, or should have started years ago.
Right.
But the issue is you have a White House where the president is strategically staying back and letting Stephen Miller and letting General Kelly be the forefront and Mark Short of Ledge Affairs. And the president's hanging back because the winning picture strategically for them is the fact that he doesn't want to be seen with this. He wants other people to be seen with this because it doesn't look good for a year anniversary for the president to have a government shutdown. But at the same time, you got Democrats and Republicans trying to figure out where the president's head is because he's moving back and forth, and they are trying to operate in good faith. There's also an issue brewing at the White House. I'm hearing that there's upset with General Kelly for what he said about the president's stance on immigration when he was campaigning, unfounded. And we've learned from past experience, when people say things about the president, he is not happy at all.
Yeah.
So we'll see how this all plays out in 17 days.
Yeah. So, Pamela, talk to me about the president's meetings today with Republican immigration hardliners. It's good because she brought up Stephen Miller and some of the hardliners. It is believed that Stephen Miller and maybe General Kelly are hardliners when it comes to immigration. Republican immigration hardliners, and separately with two red state Democrats. What does that signal?
Well, it signals from the White House point of view that, look, we're willing to work this out. We said we wouldn't negotiate on immigration while the government was shut down. Now that it's being reopened, we're willing to continue our talks. I think that's the message that the White House wanted to send today. And so there were these two separate meetings today. In the morning, you had meetings with a group of Republicans, including Senator Cornyn, Tillis, Lankford, Perdue, as well as Senators Cotton and Grassley. And then later on in the afternoon, you had the the meetings with the Democratic senators, Doug Jones and Manchin as well. In terms of what was accomplished in those meetings, it's unclear. The White House said that the focus really was on immigration. The interesting point is that Manchin, Senators Manchin and Jones, really haven't been on the forefront of the immigration issue, so it's sort of unclear what was accomplished. But what is clear here, Don, is that the White House wanted to send the message here today that now that the government's reopening, that they're willing to talk about immigration to get a deal done.
Okay. So, Dana, I think you and both Pamela mentioned that the president, maybe it was better that the president didn't get involved because he might muck it up, who knows. But was the president intentionally muzzled over the weekend? Did that ultimately help to get a deal? Was this probably the best thing for him not to get involved in this?
Was he intentionally muzzled? My experience and all of our experience over the past year is that when people try to intentionally muzzle the president, it doesn't work so well. Yeah. Having said that, my sense is that he kind of understood the moment and that this was an issue where it didn't go well on Friday as the clock was ticking towards the shutdown when he had Chuck Schumer over. They tried to come up with a deal. Different sides have different stories about what happened, but obviously it didn't work. The government shut down. And then Mitch McConnell took over. And he wasn't talking to Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, for a day or more. But what did happen, and this is something that should give people hope, because I'd like to try to be optimistic even in times where maybe it's not warranted.
It's hard, Dan. It's hard.
This group, it's hard. It's hard. But here's a good reason. This group of bipartisan senators, Don, it got up to about 25 of them. They met in Republican Senator Susan Collins' office for several days in a row. And my understanding in talking to many of those senators is that it was the goodwill and the desire and the promise for those senators in a bipartisan way to promise to push forward and to be the backstop, they called it, for dealing with this immigration issue was more of a reason that Chuck Schumer decided, you know what, I'm just going to say uncle on this, than it was Mitch McConnell's promises on the Senate floor. And that should be a reason to kind of breathe a little bit of sigh of relief, because it was adults finally showing up in the room, putting their big boy and big girl pants on and trying to get things done, which we are sorely lacking these days.
I'm glad you said it. I'm just tired. Thank you, April. I know all of you. I mean, we've worked so many hours. It's just frustrating that this all could have been resolved earlier without having to take the American people through this big song and dance. Thank you.
But Don, the same issues are still on the table, though.
Still on the table, and we'll be covering it.
The same issues are still on the table. Yes.
Thank you. See you guys soon. When we come back, did Democrats lose their best chance to get a DACA deal? I'll talk to Democratic Senator Ben Cardin. He says his party will hold Mitch McConnell to his word, but is an intention to take up a bill, is that enough? It's Senator Ben Cardin. He's a Maryland Democrat. Senator, why did you guys cave?
Well, Don, we have to get something done. If you go back to the beginning of this, the Republicans came in with a 5-week continuing resolution with no hope that anything would be done in those 5 weeks, particularly as related to the Dreamers. We needed to get action. We can't run government on continuing resolutions. As a result of this last 48 hours, we now see action on getting a budget done in the next 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks, and we have a commitment to bring a Dreamer bill to the floor of the United States Senate. And now we've had a lot of bipartisan discussions. We're optimistic.
But wasn't this the same thing? This was the same thing that was on the table on Friday, that they said this wasn't imminent. You did not have to hold the government or, hostage, and you could have allowed this continuing resolution or what have you, and then get to DACA in February, and that they would do it. There is no difference from Friday. So
First of all, Democrats want government open. We don't want government closed down. It's not right to federal workers. It's not
I understand
right to
that, Senator, with all due respect, though.
Secondly,
but my question is, what is different from Friday? Why is Monday any different from Friday? The exact same thing was on the table on Friday before the government was shut down.
It was not. We had no commitment that we would have a Dreamer bill on the floor on a way that it could, in fact, pass in the right format.
Do you have a strong commitment now?
We always thought that.
There's no strong commitment. It said
We do.
They
We have a
intend.
commitment.
He said he intends to. There's an intention. There's nothing.
Look, the American people want us to deal with the Dreamers. They understand that. Overwhelming majority. We have lots of Republicans who are supporting on this, in addition to the Democrats. Mitch McConnell made a commitment on the floor of the United States Senate. We're going to hold him to that commitment. Look, we know it's going to be a challenge, but we got to fight to make sure that we protect the Dreamers. They're part of this country, and we're going to do everything we can to protect the Dreamers.
Let's talk about commitments then. And I want to know, again, still the same question, why is this any different? Because in January of 2017, all right, the president said he was going to take care of kids who were on DACA. September 5th of this year, he officially ended the DACA program. September 13th, he agreed to a deal with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to legalize the DACA program in exchange for border security. Then on December 7th, Democrats agreed to a 2-week spending measure that doesn't legalize Dreamers, that gave Congress time to compromise. December 20th, Democrats agreed to another stopgap spending measure without DACA. January of this year, in that televised meeting, the president promised a clean bill, said he would sign whatever came across his desk, didn't do that. And then on January 18th, you guys refused to vote on a spending bill without Dreamers. What is different? What's different about this time? That you have been promised before that you were going to get DACA, they're going to bring DACA up, and it did not happen. So what gives you now the confidence that they're actually going to do it when they haven't done it just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times before? And that's just from 2017. That doesn't include all the other times that it came up to be voted on.
Don, I have very little confidence in the president on this issue. I will very much acknowledge that. He's changed his mind so many times. The last person who talks with him, he's the one who's created this problem by setting the 6-month target on DACA children being subject to deportation. Where the only confidence we have is in the Congress. The United States Senate, we had a bipartisan group that's prepared to move on a bill that will protect the Dreamers. We also have the people in this country. Americans don't want to see us rip families apart and take people who have been part of this country and tell them they're no longer welcome in America. These are children. These are people that are adding to the country. We think the political pressure will be sufficient, and we plan to stand with the Dreamers and to demand that Mitch McConnell live up to his commitment. We will. The February 9th is the deadline for the bill to be on the floor.
I get what you're saying. But are you concerned at all that this is going to backfire with your base? Because you know your base is upset. They wanted you to hold out. They wanted finally and this is them talking, Democrats to have some backbone. This is what Matt Visor is. Matt Visor is with the Boston Globe. He said Democrats have managed to accede to Republican demands, demoralize their energized base, give a disengaged president a win, and look like they held a meaningless 3-day government shutdown all at once. Did you do more harm than good?
Well, we got to help the Dreamers. We got to get this done. We know that the American people are with us on this. We also know the American people did not want to see government shut down. So it is a concern as to if the shutdown would have lasted for a lengthy period of time, where would the American people be on these issues? That's a concern. We think we are in good shape with the popular support for this because it's the right thing to get done. We also need a budget, by the way. And we need a budget. We can't continue to operate on continuing resolutions. And we think we're in better shape on both of those issues today than we were 2 days ago.
Senator, we thank you for coming on. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we come back, breaking news. Axios reporting that President Trump was personally involved in trying to push out the deputy FBI director, how Director Christopher Wray responded, and the Attorney General's reported role in all this. We'll be right back. Our breaking news tonight reporting that Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been pressuring the director of the FBI to fire the deputy director, that at the public urging of President Trump, we're told. Joining me now, Jim Sciutto, CNN Chief National Security Correspondent, and Phil Mudd, CNN Counterterrorism Analyst and a former FBI Senior Intelligence Advisor. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. New out tonight from Axios, they're reporting that Attorney General Jeff Sessions has pressured FBI Director Christopher Wray to fire Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Wray balked at this, reportedly threatened to resign if McCabe was removed. What do you both think of this report? First, you, Phil Mudd.
Boy, this is painful. I know Andy McCabe personally. When I served at the FBI under Director Mueller for 4.5 years, Andy was, I would say, one of the better officers I saw in terms of integrity, brains. But there's a different question, regardless of what I think of him personally. The question is, if you're in the federal service, you're required to take steps every year to certify that you're not involved in the political process. In other words, that you don't participate in campaigning for any particular candidate. If you're a federal official, Don, I got one question for you. Does that mean that your spouse, in this case Andy McCabe's spouse, because that's what the issue is here, is not allowed to campaign for Democratic office if you serve for a Republican president? Does that mean you have to tell your family that you can't participate in the American democracy because you chose the federal service as your career path? I don't understand why you would ask him to be fired. Tell me one thing that Andy McCabe has done in this investigation that's wrong beyond his spouse participating in the electoral process by serving as a candidate. I don't get it, Don.
And to be clear, Don, his wife served, she ran, she lost, and it was only 2 months later that McCabe was appointed deputy director, at which point, for the first time, he had some oversight of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. I mean, that's the essential charge here, is Trump making really a baseless accusation that McCabe's participation and leadership in that, or management rather, in that investigation was compromised because his wife, 2 months before, lost a state Senate race in Virginia. And I should also note that when his wife did run, McCabe sought out guidance from the FBI Inspector General for what he should do and shouldn't do. They gave him some guidelines. He followed those guidelines. So here you have the current FBI director, according to Axios, drawing a line in the sand, saying, I'm not going to fire the deputy director. I don't see cause, even when it reportedly received pressure from the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions.
A number of things to get to. Jim, I want to ask you about this. We have new information also tonight about a classified memo from House Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes. What can you tell us?
So this is another case of you just got to watch out for the politics here versus the substance behind it. So Devin Nunes has been pushing out this classified memo that he says shows that the FBI acted possibly illegally during the Russia investigation in seeking a FISA warrant from a special FISA court to monitor Carter Page, who was a mid-level campaign advisor for Trump during the 2016 election. Now, it appears that Devin Nunes' claim is that this FISA warrant was based on that now famous dossier compiled by the former British agent, etc., and that in doing so, in effect, they got the warrant based on democratically funded research. Now, the fact is this. One, CNN's own reporting is that the FBI had its own intelligence to back up this warrant request. And let's be fair, and Phil Mudd would know this better than me, seeing as he served in an actual supervisory role in the FBI. The FBI is not going to go to the FISA court just with a document produced by somebody else from this Fusion GPS memo. They're going to come with their own goods. And whether or not that memo was mentioned in the warrant request is another question. But it appears that Nunes is making the argument that this shows that they based this entire FISA warrant and therefore the surveillance during the Russia investigation during the campaign on a democratically funded dossier. It just doesn't seem at this point that the facts stand up to that. Now, we haven't seen the memo. It may have something else in there. But at this point, and I'll defer to Phil here as to whether the FBI would seek out such a warrant based entirely on outside produced research.
I think your question is a very good one, but in that, let me ask you, Phil, and you can respond to all of it. Is this all about undermining Mueller and protecting the president?
This is not about what the FBI did. This is about supporting the president to say, if Mueller comes up with further prosecutions or pardon me, further indictments that point toward the White House, let's undermine them by saying the White House based some of its intelligence collection on inappropriate methods. Let me take you inside the room for a moment. And I've been in front of FISA court judges in my career. Let me tell you how this works. You're suggesting that dozens or hundreds of FBI agents are participating in a conspiracy to go to the other side of government, in this case the judicial branch, judges based on information collected by a former British intelligence officer who has sources who have sub-sources in Russia. In other words, you're 3 or 4 steps removed from the information in Russia, and you're going to go in front of a judge and say, I want to listen to somebody's telephone or read their email based on that information? A, I don't buy it, and B, what Devin Nunes is saying is not only is the FBI wrong, he's also suggesting that the judges who reviewed the FBI application to read somebody's emails just rubber stamped it and said that's okay. That's a conspiracy I don't believe, Don. It's nonsense.
Jim, how would this memo be released? Will it be public?
Well, that's what they're trying to do. I mean, listen, it's a classified memo, right? So you would need to go through a long, labyrinthine declassification process to get it out. In effect, Republicans, led by Devin Nunes, want to jumpstart that process. They can use somewhat obscure rules to do that, in which case the White House would then have, by these rules, 5 days to object to that. And, of course, if this is in the president's interest to get this out there, perhaps the White House wouldn't stand in the way. In other words, there are tools that could be used to jumpstart this and put out what is otherwise classified information. And it appears that there's some political will behind that. We'll see if it happens.
Yeah. But Phil, if the FBI did indeed, and I understand what your explanation was, you're saying this involves hundreds of people, a lot of people. But if the FBI did improperly use a FISA warrant, that's critical information, right? Isn't it? I mean, doesn't the public have the right to know about it?
They do, but there's a couple basic questions that you have to answer first before you have some congressman without corresponding with his people across the aisle. That is, a Republican talking to the Democrats, before that person goes and releases this to the public. Let me give you a couple examples. The inspectors general at federal agencies, I know this is boring, but it's important. The inspector general for the Department of Justice doesn't answer to the FBI and doesn't answer to the Department of Justice. They answer to the Congress. If you want to determine what happened at the Department of Justice or the FBI, you go ask the inspector general, hey, go look under the carpet. Did they do something inappropriate? Second question, why don't you go to the judges on the FISA court and say, did you inappropriately sign a warrant? Why do you not talk to the Democrats and say, do we have a bipartisan view on this? Why don't you ask the FBI what their policies and procedures are for determining when they should read somebody's email? I think Devin Nunes is saying, I want to bypass every one of those standard steps because I want to talk to the American people first. I've got some cookbooks, and I think it's better, instead of going through the process, to give the Americans cookbooks. This is pretty simple. It's politics.
What are Democrats saying about this, Jim?
Well, they're saying, Adam Schiff, for instance, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, says that this is misleading, right? That it's an incomplete picture of the intelligence used behind this warrant, behind the FBI's counterintelligence investigation of Russian interference in the election. They're saying it's misleading and incomplete. And to be clear, let's be frank here, beyond the surveillance of Carter Page, the FBI investigation of Russian interference in the election was enormous. Goes far beyond Carter Page and far beyond, frankly, the question of whether anyone connected to Trump cooperated with, colluded with, or was open to cooperating or colluding with Russia. They were looking at Russian interference, Russian infiltration on a whole host of levels. So any argument here that this entire investigation was somehow built and based on this one dossier, it just doesn't stand up to the facts.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Come back, the president standing on the sidelines during the government shutdown, letting Congress take the lead on negotiations. But shouldn't Trump, the deal maker, have been able to make a deal to prevent a shutdown? Here's some breaking news tonight. There's reporting tonight that Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been pressuring the director of the FBI to fire the deputy director, that at the public urging of the president. I want to talk about this now with CNN political commentator Joan Walsh and CNN contributor Selena Zito. Joan, I want to get your response first, and let me make it very clear about who these people are. This is Axios who's reporting this tonight.
I saw that.
That the Attorney General Jeff Sessions pressuring the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, to fire Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Axios says that Wray threatened to resign if McCabe was removed. What do you think?
Well, good for Ray. I mean, this is his first big test, but we've already had what looks to be obstruction of justice with the president firing James Comey. The idea that Jeff Sessions would even contemplate this to go down to McCabe, who they're upset that his wife got some money from the Democratic Party when she ran for office in Virginia. It was a long time ago. He recused himself. He was very above board. There's a series of emails where you see everything that all the steps that he took to insulate himself from cases where it would matter. He's a person of incredible integrity. If you read the email trail about recusal, etc. I'm talking about Andrew McCabe. You see a person who's striving to do the right thing. And the way that they have slimed him in the first place is horrible. And the idea that they would seek to get rid of him and that Jeff Sessions, after all he's been through, would go along is very disturbing.
It has been said that the White House was concerned. They said they were concerned about how this would play in the media. They said, understandably, they were gun-shy after the Comey debacle. They didn't want that scene, so McCabe remains because they didn't want another scene after the Comey debacle.
They shouldn't.
Selena, what are your thoughts on the reports?
I'm right with Joan. I think McCabe has shown there's been a paper trail. It's not as though we don't know how he's behaved in the lead up to his wife running. I think maybe that the president could have been able to do this had he not fired Comey, but that sort of negated any ability to have McCabe leave, and it appears, based on what you're saying, is that they've just decided to leave this alone. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, they said that they
because of what happened with Comey.
Yeah, I'll read the quote to you from it. It says, Ray's resignation under close circumstances, under those circumstances, excuse me, would have created a media firestorm. The White House, understandably gun-shy after the Comey debacle, didn't want that scene, so McCabe remains.
And that's wise.
Yeah,
I think that's very wise.
Yeah, but it may not be the end of this because you never know.
It's never the end.
Well, you never know.
You never know. But I want to switch gears and I want to talk about the shutdown, which is on everybody's minds right now. President Trump loves to brag about his deal-making abilities. It's one of his favorite lines. Watch this.
I'm going to make the great deals. I am going to make great deals for our country. I've built an extraordinary business on relationships and deals that benefit all parties involved, always. I make deals. I negotiate. Everybody wants me to negotiate. That's what I'm known as a negotiator. I'm so anxious to negotiate. Nobody can out-negotiate these deals. I will make a great deal and lots of great deals for the American people. We don't make great deals anymore, but we will once I become president.
Selena, you were on the program on Friday. I kept wondering, where's the president? Where's the leadership here? Lawmakers from both parties complained about his lack of involvement in this process. Where was the master deal maker, Trump?
I just want you to know that I'm a terrible deal maker. I'm the person who always picks the wrong line in the bank, right? So, you know, look, one of the things that I have said, and I've said this on this show, is one of the things that would always sort of turn Trump's supporters away from him is if he became part of the swamp. And so as I've watched like the past few days play out, I've wondered if he made the conscious decision, like, you know, I've said I was the deal maker, but if I get in this swamp, this is not going to help me. So he wisely stepped back, I think, and in terms of if we want to talk about him wanting to hold on to his base, and he let the establishment go at it and make their mistakes and you know, shut the government down, and he was kind of nowhere to be found. Well, it doesn't play into his deal maker profile that he's built up about himself. It does keep him out of the entanglements of the swamp. Well, and I will tell you this. I've gone around and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and you know, maybe the Democrats face more problems from this. But I think this stays status quo. I don't think that
You
there's.
don't think it has a big impact on anything? It
I
doesn't
don't
change
think
anything.
it has
Okay.
any big impact, and part of it is because we're drinking out of a fire hose every day with news, right?
Oh, really?
So this is-
You don't say that. I got to get Joan in there.
No, really,
The
honestly.
White House official is telling CNN that President Trump hadn't spoken to Democrats because some of the administration thought that it might complicate their sort of blame the Democrats narrative.
Sure.
How do you see this?
Well, I have to take issue with one thing Selena said when she said this. He might have done this wisely, because he doesn't do anything wisely. And I think the only reason they got a deal, which I don't think is a great deal for Democrats, if we can talk about that later, the only reason they got a deal is that he was sidelined. And we saw a situation in the last 2 weeks, Don, where he wanted to pass a bill of love, and he was going to sign anything, and he was going to take the heat. And then he gets back to the Oval Office, and Stephen Miller and John Kelly are waiting there with the switch to spank him. So and then that happened again. He reached some kind of accommodation with Chuck Schumer over hamburgers, and Chuck is offering money to build the wall, and he thinks, he didn't say they had a deal, but they were getting closer. And then President John Kelly picked up the phone and scuttled that deal with Schumer. Yeah. So it looked like to me that they were keeping him hidden away in the Oval Office, with his desk clear, talking on the phone with his MAGA hat, looking like a little toddler playing at Daddy's desk. I don't think that he chose that wisely. I think they shuttled him over there.
I was going to say Vice President Stephen Miller, but maybe it's Copra, because they're both.
I can't decide. Yeah, it's hard.
All right, I want both of you to stick with me when we come back. Donald Trump was known for running his business by keeping his staff on their toes and competing for his attention. Now, I want to ask you all, if running the White House, is he doing it the same way? Is that an effective way to govern?